History is impacted by everyone, and it can be easy to overlook fascinating stories and lives within it, especially when so many big events are the result of actions from thousands of people, ranging from the leaders at the top to the everyday person at the bottom. This video is going to focus on the story of a woman named Frances Thompson, who went through a lot of hardship in her life yet helped contribute to the passing of the 14th Amendment of the American Constitution through her testimony to Congress. This video will discuss some heavy topics, but nevertheless I believe her story is not only one that deserves to be told and remembered, but also illustrates what amazing history you can easily miss. Frances Thompson was born around the year 1840 into slavery. Like most slaves, there was no recording of her actual birth date. Since African slaves in the United States were forbidden to learn how to read and write, this meant that records of her earlier childhood are sparse and sometimes contradictory. But there were two definitive aspects of her life that made her stick out wherever she lived. Firstly, from an early age, she needed crutches to move around due to what was described as a cancer of the foot. We don't know what the official modern diagnosis would be, but nevertheless, her legs were described as crooked as the young dogwood tree or a ram's horn, and she would be nicknamed as Aunt Crutchy when she was older. The other notable aspect of her life was that she was assigned male at birth, but Frances identified herself as a girl and would live her life as one. Her owner, named Robert Walker, allowed her to dress in traditional female clothing and would treat Frances as a girl, although considering they were all slaves, it probably wasn't that much difference for Robert anyway. Frances Thompson would later recount how her owner would even let her use his razors to shave with. Either way, she was allowed to live as a girl and she would continue to do so. The Walker family moved to Memphis, Tennessee when Thompson was still a child. During the American Civil War, the majority of the Walker family died in the conflict as a part of the rebel army. So at the age of around 26, Frances Thompson was now a free woman. She would live in a black neighborhood on Gayoso Street nicknamed Hell's. But nevertheless, Thompson was able to afford her rent through the way many black women did at the time, in the form of clothing-based work, sewing, washing, ironing, and so on. But while Thompson's story made her a local fascination of sorts, she would reach the national spotlight in 1866. Despite legal slavery being over in the United States, many bitter Southerners would resent freed African Americans and attempt to intimidate them through political disenfranchisement and violence. For Memphis in particular, the black population had jumped from 3,000 at the beginning of the Civil War to around 20,000 by the end of it. Many former slaves would continue to move there after leaving their former masters. This made Memphis a particular target of ire as bitter whites wanted to make sure the freed former slaves would know their place. Accounts of police brutality on the black population would result in Union forces sending more occupying troops to keep the peace as a part of Reconstruction. A lot of Union soldiers sent there happened to be African American veterans that participated in the war, which increased tensions. There were multiple conflicts between the white police force and black soldiers, but on May 1, 1866, one particular incident escalated when the police attempted to break up a party of black soldiers and citizens. One officer accidentally misfired and shot his own leg, but the force mistook it as the soldiers firing upon them. The police were joined by an angry mob of white residents and soon escalated the situation to a riot. 48 would die while 75 would be injured. Arson during the Memphis Massacre would result in 91 homes, 4 black churches, and 12 black schools being burnt to the ground. During the events, Frances Thompson and her housemate Lucy Smith were at their apartment when 7 white men broke into their home, 3 of them being police officers. After forcing the women to make them a meal, they demanded to have their way with them. Thompson refused and demanded that the men leave her apartment. The men then violently forced themselves onto Thompson and Smith at gunpoint, molesting both of them. They were then robbed of $300, which in today's money is closer to $10,000. This absolutely horrible series of events understandably traumatized both women, and they had to be given medical attention from a doctor to recover, being unable to work for 2 weeks. But Frances Thompson was determined to speak out about what happened to her. Later that same year, Frances Thompson and Lucy Smith would both testify their experiences in full to Congress. In their testimonies, they told every detail about their assailants, including the cruel statements of their assailants describing their desire to, quote, burn up the last goddamn N-word. Thompson's testimony with Smith's corroboration shocked all who heard it, bringing not only sympathy for their experiences, but helping to swing public support towards legislation supporting African American rights. The 14th Amendment, which would guarantee legal equality and citizenship for all born in the United States, needed 28 states to ratify it before it would become law. The sympathy garnered from Thompson's testimony helped lead to 6 states passing it within a few months. President Andrew Johnson had a more lenient view of Reconstruction, but the events of the Memphis riots caused many to realize that more needed to be done. As a result, during the 1866 midterm elections, a lot of radical Republicans would be elected to office. Radical Republicans were a group of Republicans that unequivocally supported African American civil rights at the time. The 14th Amendment would pass and be ratified in 1868. Thompson's testimony was also influential in later President Ulysses S. Grant passing the Enforcement Acts of 1870 to 1871, which helped destroy the power of the original iteration of the Ku Klux Klan. Thompson was the first known transgender person to testify before Congress, and the fact it was over not only her own trauma but also the brutal racial violence on African Americans made it a very brave testimony to say the least. Like anyone else who would speak out on these atrocities though, it would also make her a target. In 1876, Frances Thompson was arrested for cross-dressing, which sounds unusual considering she had been living as a woman and dressing that way for most of her life at this point. Frances Thompson even claimed that the police already knew that she was trans, or as she phrased it at the time, of double sex, and that they were only looking for an excuse to arrest her. She further asserted that she had already been living life as a woman, so her choice of dress wasn't a crime. Nevertheless, upon being arrested, she was humiliated with a forced medical examination to out her. Images of her in feminine and masculine clothing to compare were made and distributed to newspapers, which dubbed her as either the male version of Frances with an I or Frankie. After she was outed, newspapers used this as an excuse to discredit her story during the Memphis riots. Some said her testimony could be dismissed because men supposedly can't be assaulted, which is doubly screwed up. Thompson's character was further assassinated as she was being labeled as a criminal, a person of revolting character, all of which was further used to try and paint her testimony as that of a lie. Dismissing stories of atrocities as lies due to claimed bad character was not unique to Frances Thompson, and would sadly be very common during the Jim Crow era against many other African Americans by white supremacists. Many newspaper articles weren't even hiding their obvious slant. They didn't need to. Thompson was fined $50 and upon being unable to pay was then sentenced to work on a chain gang for 100 days, which is added cruelty considering her disabled legs. Frances, of course, was forced to dress in men's clothing during the whole ordeal. Nevertheless, Frances stood firm with who she was and never gave up on that. Once out of jail, Frances would resume her life as a woman. Sadly though, Frances would soon grow sick with dysentery and would die later that year at around the age of 36. Frances did not have an easy life, but throughout it she always continued to live as herself. Her willingness to testify her experiences in front of Congress had monumental impact on civil rights at the time. Slaves were previously chattel to be used however their masters pleased, but here was a freed woman asserting herself as a person deserving of rights and dignity just like anyone else, speaking out for African Americans and assault victims alike. Furthermore, the fact that a trans woman was a major part of early Reconstruction history shows that despite there being different terms or levels of understandings at the time, trans people and LGBT people in general have always been a part of history and are not merely a product of the modern day. If you look for them, they're there. I'm Emperor Tiger Star, and I'll see you guys next time.